where I read a public domain book for you live. Um, this is inspired by the fact that one, I really enjoy reading out loud. Maybe it's my inherent narcissistic tendencies, but what can I say? I like the sound of my own voice. If I didn't, I wouldn't be a YouTuber. Um, so I thought that would be a nice thing to do. And the other thing that inspired it was the Dracula, what do you say? How you say? Like craze on Tumblr, where everyone was just like really into Dracula because it went into the public domain, and then people were doing this like get the letters via email every day, and I was like, hey, that's fun. So that's what we're doing today. We are gonna go. I don't think we'll read the whole book that we have planned. I don't know how long it is, but I think even if it was short, I don't know. So we're gonna go into either the phone runs out of battery or I run out of battery, whichever happens first. The book we're reading is A Damsel in Distress by P.G. Wodehouse. I feel like I've seen the name P.G. Wodehouse like floating around in the like reader space zeitgeist, but I confess I don't know much about him. He's kind of like a classic dude, right? I'm not sure. Let me give you the blurb. An American composer, George Bevan, falls in love with a mysterious young lady who takes refuge in his taxicab one day. He tracks her down to an English country manor, where a case of mistaken identity leads to all manner of comedy and excitement. The novel was first serialized in the Saturday Evening Post in 1919. It was later adapted into a silent film, a stage play, and a musical starring Fred Astaire. Probably a key, not a key, but like a big reason why the phrase "a damsel in distress" is still like in use, right? And like Fred Astaire is a big dude. That's why I think Wodehouse, P.G. Wodehouse, like he's a big name and like stuff, right? So without further ado, let's get into it. First, the dedication to Maud and Ivan Carroll. First chapter. I was trying to see if there's like a prelogue or if we just get right into it. No, yeah, I think we just get right into it. Let me see how many chapters there are. There are 28 chapters. So depending on how long the chapters are, this might take us a while to get through. But drumroll please. Let's get started. A Damsel in Distress by P.G. Wodehouse. Inasmuch as the scene of this story is the historical pile Belpher Castle in the county of Hampshire, it would be an agreeable task to open it with a leisurely description of the place, followed by some notes on the history of the Earls of Marshmoreton, who have owned it since the 15th century. Unfortunately, in these days of rush and hurry, a novelist works at a disadvantage. He must leap into the middle of his tale with as little delay as he would employ in boarding a moving tram-car. He must get off the mark with the smooth swiftness of a jackrabbit surprised while lunching. Otherwise, people throw him aside and go out to picture palaces. I may briefly remark that the present Lord Marshmoreton is a widower of some 48 years, that he has 2 children, a son, Percy Wilbraham Marsh, Lord Felfour, who is on the brink of his 21st birthday, and a daughter, Lady Patricia Maud Marsh, who is just 20, that the chatelaine of the castle, what's chatelaine? I guess it must mean the lady of the castle. That the chatelaine of the castle is Lady Caroline Bain, Lord Marshmoreton's sister, who married the very wealthy colliery owner, no idea what colliery is, Clifford Bain, a few years before his death, which unkind people say she hastened. Drama. And that she has a stepson, Reginald. Give me time to mention these few facts and I am done. On the glorious past of the Marshmoretons I will not even touch. Luckily, the loss to literature is not irreparable. Lord Marshmoreton himself is engaged upon a history of the family, which will doubtless be on every bookshelf as soon as his lordship gets it finished. And as for the castles and its surroundings, including the model dairy and the amber drawing room, you may see them for yourself any Thursday when Belpher is Belfer is thrown open to the public on payment of a fee of 1 shilling a head. The money is collected by Keggs the butler and goes to a worthy local charity. At least, that is the idea. But the voice of calumny is never silenced, and there exists a school of thought, headed by Albert, the page boy, which holds that Keggs sticks to these shillings like glue, and adds them to his already considerable savings in the farmers' and merchants' banks on the left side of the High Street in Belpher Village, next to the Oddfellows Hall. With regards to this, one can only say that Keggs looks far too much like a particularly saintly bishop to indulge in any such practices. On the other hand, Albert knows Keggs. We must leave the matter open. Of course, appearances are deceptive. Anyone, for instance, who had been standing outside the front entrance of the castle at 11 o'clock on a certain June morning might easily have made a mistake. Such a person would probably have jumped to the conclusion that the middle-aged lady of a determined cast of countenance, who was standing next to the rose garden, talking to the gardener and watching the young couple strolling on the terrace below, was the mother of the pretty girl, and that she was smiling because the latter had recently become engaged to the tall, pleasant-faced youth at her side. Sherlock Holmes himself might have been misled. One can hear him explaining the thing to Watson in one of those lightning flashes of inductive reasoning of his. It is the only explanation, my dear Watson, if the lady were merely complimenting the gardener on his rose garden, and if her smile were merely caused by the excellent appearance of that rose garden, there would be an answering smile on the face of the gardener. But as you see, he looks morose and gloomy. As a matter of fact, the gardener, that is to say, the stocky, brown-faced man in shirt-sleeves and corduroy trousers who was frowning into a can of whale oil solution, was the Earl of Marshmoreton, and there were 2 reasons for his gloom. He hated to be interrupted while working, and furthermore, Lady Caroline Byng always got on his nerves, and never more so than when, as now, she speculated on the possibility of a romance between her stepson Reggie and his lordship's daughter, Maud. I'm sorry, I've forgotten who Lady Caroline Byng is. I need to go back and see it again. I thought it was the sister of the guy. Yeah, it is his sister. Okay. Lady Caroline Byng always got on his nerves, just hates his sister. Kind of a red flag. Alright, let's get back into it. Only his intimates would have recognized in this curious corduroy-trousered figure the 7th Earl of Marshmoreton. The Lord Marshmoreton, I hate that word, who made intermittent appearances in London, who lunched among bishops at the Athenaeum Club without exciting remark, was a correctly dressed gentleman whom no one would have suspected of covering his sturdy legs in anything but the finest cloth. But if you will glance of your copy of Who's Who and turn up the M's, you will find in the space allotted to the Earl the words hobby gardening, to which, in a burst of modest pride, his lordship has added, awarded first prize for Hybrid Teas, Temple Flower Show, 1911. The words tell their own story. Lord Marshmoreton was the most enthusiastic amateur gardener in the land of enthusiastic amateur gardeners. He lived for his garden. The love which other men expend on their nearest and dearest, Lord Marshmoreton lavished on seeds, roses, and loamy soil. The hatred which some of his orders feel for socialists and demagogues, Lord Marshmoreton kept for rose beetles, and the small yellowish white insect which is so depraved and a sinister character that it goes through life with an alias, I don't know, being sometimes called a rose hopper and sometimes a thrip. I have no idea what bug this is, but pretty funny. A simple soul, Lord Marshmoreton, mild and pleasant. Yet put him among the thrips, and he becomes a dealer out of death and slaughter, a destroyer in the class of Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan. Thrips feed on the underside of rose leaves, sucking their juices and causing them to turn yellow. And Lord Marshmoreton's views on these things were so rigid that he would have poured whale oil solution on his grandmother if he had found her on the underside of one of his rose leaves, sucking its juice. The only time in the day when he ceased to be the horny... Sorry, it literally is what it says. The only time in the day when he ceased to be the horny-handed toiler and became the aristocrat was in the evening after dinner, when, egged on by Lady Caroline, who gave him no rest in the matter, he would retire to his private study and work on his history of the family, assisted by his able secretary, Elise Faraday. His progress on the massive work was, however, slow. 10 hours in the open air make a man drowsy, and too often Lord Marshmoreton would fall asleep in mid-sentence to the annoyance of Miss Faraday, who was a conscientious girl and liked to earn her salary. That's so funny. The couple on the terrace had turned. Reggie Bing's face as he bent over Maud, I don't know, was earnest and animated, and even from a distance it was possible to see how the girl's eyes lit up at what he was saying. She was hanging on his words. Lady Caroline's smile became even more and more benevolent. "They make a charming pair," she murmured. "I wonder what dear Reggie is saying, perhaps at this very moment." She broke off with a sigh of content. She had had her troubles over this affair. Dear Reggie, usually so plastic in her hands, had displayed an unaccountable reluctance to offer his agreeable self to Maud, in spite of the fact that never, not even on the public platform which she adorned so well, had his stepmother reasoned more clearly than she did when pointing out to him the advantages of the match. It was not that Reggie disliked Maud. He admitted that she was a topper. She can top me. On several occasions, going so far as to describe her as absolutely priceless. But he seemed reluctant to ask her to marry him. How could Lady Caroline know that Reggie's entire world, or such of it as was not occupied by racing cars and golf, was filled by Alice Faraday? Drama! Reggie had never told her. He had not even told Miss Faraday. "Perhaps at this very moment," went on Lady Caroline, "the dear boy is proposing to her." Lord Marshmoreton grunted, and continued to peer with a questioning eye in the awesome brew which he had prepared for the thrips. "One thing is very satisfactory," said Lady Caroline. "I mean that Maud seems entirely to have got over that ridiculous infatuation of hers for that man she met in Wales last summer. She could not be so cheerful if she were still brooding on that. I hope you will admit now, John, that I was right in keeping her practically a prisoner here, and never allowing her a chance of meeting the man again, either by accident or design. They say absence makes the heart grow fonder. Stuff! A girl of Maud's age falls in and out of love half a dozen times a year. I feel sure she has almost forgotten the man by now." "Eh?" said Lord Marshmoreton. His mind had been far away, dealing with green flies. "I was speaking about that man Maud met when she was staying with Brenda in Wales." "Oh, yes." "Oh, yes," echoed Lady Caroline, annoyed. "Is that the only comment you can find to make your only daughter becomes infatuated with a perfect stranger, a man we have never seen, of whom we know nothing, not even his name, nothing except that he's an American and hasn't a penny, Maud admitted that, and all you say is, 'Oh, yes.'" "But it's all over now, isn't it? I understood the dashed affair was all over." "We hope so, but I should feel safer if Maud were engaged to Reggie. I do think you might take the trouble to speak to Maud." "Speak to her? I do speak to her." Lord Marshmoreton's brain moved slowly when he was preoccupied with his roses. "We're on excellent terms." Hilarious. Lady Caroline frowned impatiently. Hers was an alert, vigorous mind, bright and strong, like a steel trap, and her brother's vagueness and growing habit of inattention irritated her. "I mean, to speak to her about becoming engaged to Reggie. You are her father. Surely you can at least try to persuade her." "Can't coerce a girl." "I never suggested that you should coerce her, as you put it. I merely meant that you could point out to her, as a father, where her duty and happiness lie." "Drink this!" cried his lordship with sudden fury, spraying his can over the nearest bush. And addressing his remark to the invisible thrips. He had forgotten Lady Caroline completely. "Don't stint yourselves, there's lots more." A girl came down the steps of the castle and made her way towards them. She was a good-looking girl with an air of quiet efficiency about her. Her eyes were grey and whimsical, her head was uncovered, and the breeze stirred her dark hair. She made a graceful picture in the morning sunshine, and Reggie Byng, sighting her from the terrace, wobbled in his tracks, turned pink, and lost the thread of his remarks. The sudden appearance of Alice Faraday always affected him like that. "I have copied out the notes you made last night, Lord Marshmoreton. I typed 2 copies." Alice Faraday spoke in a quiet, respectful, yet subtly authoritative voice. She was a girl of great character. Previous employers of her Previous employers of her services as a secretary had found her a jewel. To Lord Marshmoreton, she was rapidly becoming a perfect incubus. I think they're using incubus in a different meaning here. Their views on the relative importance of gardening and family histories did not coincide. To him, the history of the Marshmoreton family was the occupation of the idle hour. She seemed to think that he ought to regard it as his life work. She was always coming and digging him out of the garden and dragging him back to what should have been a purely after-dinner task. It was Lord Marshmoreton's habit, when he awoke after one of his naps too late to resume work, to throw out some vague promise of attending to it tomorrow. But, he reflected bitterly, the girl ought to have tact and sense to understand that this was only polite persiflage and not to be taken literally. They are very rough, continued Alice, addressing her conversation to the seat of his lordship's corduroy trousers. Lord Marshmoreton always assumed a stooping attitude when he saw Miss Faraday approaching with papers in her hand, for he labored under pathetic delusion, of which no amount of failures could rid him, that if she did not see his face, she would withdraw. You remember, last night you promised you would attend to them this morning. She paused long enough to receive a non-committal grunt by way of answer. Of course, if you're busy, she said placidly, with a half-glance at Lady Caroline. That masterful woman could always be counted on as an ally in these little encounters. Nothing of the kind, said Lady Caroline crisply. She was still ruffled by the lack of attention which her recent utterances had received, and welcomed the chance of administering discipline. Get up at once, John, and go in and work. I am working, pleaded Lord Marshmoreton. Despite his 48 years, his sister Caroline still had the power at times to make him feel like a small boy. She had been a great martinet in the days of their mutual nursery. What's martinet? We'll never know. The family history is more important than grubbing about in the dirt. I cannot understand why you do not leave this sort of thing to Macpherson. Why you should pay him liberal wages and do his work for him, I cannot see. You know the publishers are waiting for the history. Go and attend to these notes at once. You promised you would attend to them this morning, Lord Marshmoreton, said Alice invitingly. I guess I didn't really do an inviting tone on that, but whatever. Lord Marshmoreton clung to his can of whale oil solution with the clutch of a drowning man. None knew better than he that these interviews, especially when Caroline was present to lend the weight of her dominating personality, always ended in the same way. Yes, he said. Tonight, perhaps. After dinner, eh? Yes, after dinner. That will be capital. I think you ought to attend to them this morning, said Alice, gently persistent. It really perturbed this girl to feel that she was not doing work enough to merit her generous salary. What a crazy girl. Just take the paycheck and go, girl. And on the subject of the history of the Marshmoreton family, she was an enthusiast. It had a glamour for her. Lord Marshmoreton's fingers relaxed their hold. Throughout the rose garden, hundreds of spared thrips went on with their morning meal, unwitting of doom averted. Oh, all right, come into the library. Very well, Lord Marshmoreton. Miss Faraday turned to Lady Caroline. I have been looking up the trains, Lady Caroline. The best is the 12:15. It has a dining car and stops at Belfort if signaled. Excuse me. Are you going away, Caroline? Inquired Lord Marshmoreton, hopefully. I am giving a short talk to the Social Progress League at Lewisham. I shall return tomorrow. Okay, wait, hold on. I kind of have the hiccups. Okay. Oh, said Marshmoreton, hope fading from his voice. Thank you, Miss Faraday, said Lady Caroline. The 12:15. The motor will be round at 11:45. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, Miss Faraday, will you call to Reggie as you pass and tell him I wish to speak to him? Maud had left Reggie by the time Alice Faraday reached him, and that ardent youth was sitting on a stone seat, smoking a cigarette and entertaining himself with meditations in which thoughts of Alice competed for precedence, with graver reflections connected with the subject of the correct stance for his approach shots. which I assume is like a hunting thing? I don't know. Reggie's was a troubled spirit these days. He was in love, and he had developed a bad slice with his mid-iron. Oh no, it's about golfing. He likes to golf. I forgot we saw that. And he had developed a bad slice with his mid-iron. He was practically a soul in torment. Lady Caroline asked me to tell you that she wishes to speak with you, Mr. Bain. Reggie leaped up from his seat. Hello, there you are. I mean to say, what? He was conscious, as was his custom in her presence, of a warm, prickly sensation in the small of his back. Some kind of elephantiasis seemed to have attacked his hands and feet, swelling them to enormous proportions. He wished profoundly that he could get rid of his habit of yelping with nervous laughter whenever he encountered the girl of his dreams. It was calculated to give her a wrong impression of a chap, make her think him a fearful chump, and what not. The Lady Caroline is leaving by the 12:15. That's good. What I mean to say is, oh, she is she? I see what you mean. The absolute necessity of saying something at least moderately coherent gripped him. He rallied his forces. You wouldn't care to come for a stroll after I've seen the matter, or a row on the lake, or any rot like that, would you? Thank you very much, but I must go in and help Lord Marshmoreton with his book. What a what a damn shame. The pity of it tore at Reggie's heartstrings. He burned with generous wrath against Lord Marshmoreton, that modern Simon Legree, who used his capitalistic power to make a slave of this girl and keep her toiling indoors when all the world was sunshine. Shall I go and ask him if you can't put it off till after dinner? Oh no, thanks very much. I'm sure Lord Marshmoreton wouldn't dream of it. She passed on with a pleasant smile. When he had recovered from the effect of this, Reggie proceeded slowly to the upper level to meet his stepmother. Hello, Mother. Pretty fit and so forth. What did you want to see me about? Well, Reggie, what is the news? Eh? What? News? Didn't you get hold of a paper at breakfast? Nothing much in it. Tam Duggan beat Alec Fraser 3-up and 2 to play at press week. That means nothing to me. I didn't notice anything else much. There's this new musical comedy at the Regal. Opened last night. It seems to be just like Mother Makes. The Morning Post gave it a topping notice. I must trickle up to town and see it sometime this week. Lady Caroline frowned. The slowness in the uptake, coming so soon after her brother's inattention, displeased her. No, no, no. I mean, you and Maud have been talking to each other for quite a long time, and she seemed very interested in what you were saying. I hoped you might have some good news for me. Reggie's face brightened. He caught her drift. Oh, yes, I see what you mean. No, there wasn't anything of that sort or shape or other. What were you saying to her then that interested her so much? I was explaining how I landed dead on the pin with my spoon out of a sand trap at the 11th hole yesterday. It certainly was a pretty ripe short, considering. I sliced into this baby bunker, don't you know? I simply can't keep them straight with the iron nowadays. And there the pill was, grinning up at me from the sand. Of course, strictly speaking, I ought to have used a niblick, but do you mean to say, Reggie, that with such an excellent opportunity, you did not ask Maud to marry you? I see what you mean. Well, as a matter of absolute fact, I, as it were, didn't. Lady Caroline uttered a wordless sound. By the way, Mater, said Reggie, I forgot to tell you about that. It's all off. What? Absolutely. You see, it appears that there's a chappie unknown for whom Maud has an absolute pash. It seems she met the sportsman up in Wales last summer. She was caught in the rain, and he happened to be passing by and rallied round with his raincoat, and one thing led to another. Always raining in Wales, what? Good fishing, though, here and there. Well, what I mean is, the Scove was so deucedly civil and all that now she won't look at anybody else. He's the blue-eyed boy, and everybody else is and also ran, with about as much sense as a blind man with one arm trying to get out of bunker with a toothpick. What? Perfect nonsense. I know all about that affair. It was just a passing fancy that never meant anything. Maud has got over that long ago. She didn't seem to think so. Now, Reggie, said Lady Caroline tensely, please listen to me. You know that the castle will be full of people in a day or two for Percy's coming of age, and this next few days may be your last chance of having a real, long, private talk with Maud. I shall be seriously annoyed if you neglect this opportunity. There's no excuse for the way you're behaving. Maud is a charming girl. Oh, absolutely, one of the best. Very well, then. But, Mater, what I mean to say is, I don't want any more temporizing, Reggie. No, Absolutely not, said Reggie dutifully, wishing he knew what the word meant and wishing also that life had not become so frightfully complex. It's so hard to be a British aristocrat. Now, this afternoon, why should you not take Maud for a long ride in your car? Reggie grew more cheerful. At least he had an answer for that. Can't be done, I'm afraid. I've got to motor into town to meet Percy. He's arriving from Oxford this morning. I promised to meet him down and tow him back in the car. Well, I see. Well then, why couldn't you? I say, Mater, dear old soul, said Reggie hastily, I think you better tear yourself away and what not. If you're catching the 12:15, you ought to be staggering round to see you haven't forgotten anything. There's the car coming round now. I wish now I had decided to go by a later train. No, no, mustn't miss the 12:15. Good, fruity train. Everybody speaks well of it. Well, see you anon, Mater. I think you'd better run like a hare. You will remember what I said? Oh, absolutely. Goodbye, then. I shall be back tomorrow. Reggie returned slowly to his stone seat. He breathed a little heavily as he felt for his cigarette case. He felt like a haunted fawn. Maud came out of the house as the car disappeared down the long avenue of elms. She crossed the terrace to where Reggie sat brooding on life and its problem. Reggie turned. Hello, Maud, dear old thing. Take a seat. Maud sat down beside him. There was a flush on her pretty face, and when she spoke, her voice quivered with suppressed excitement. Reggie, she said, laying a small hand on his arm. We're friends, aren't we? Reggie patted her back paternally. There were few people he liked better than Maud. Always have been, since the dear old days of childhood. What? I can trust you, can't I? Absolutely. There's something I want you to do for me, Reggie. You have to keep it a dead secret, of course. The strong, silent man. That's me. What is it? You're driving me into town in your car this afternoon, aren't you? To meet Percy? That was the idea. Could you go this morning instead, and take me? Of course. Maud shook her head. You don't know what you're letting yourself in for, Reggie, or I'm sure you wouldn't agree so lightly. I'm not allowed to leave the castle, you know, because of what I was telling you about. The chappie? Yes, so it would be terrible scenes if anyone found out. Never mind, dear old soul. I'll risk it. None shall learn your secret from these lips. You're a darling, Reggie. But what's the idea? Why do you want to go today, particularly? Maud looked over her shoulder. Because, she lowered her voice, though there was no one near. Because he's back in London. He's a sort of secretary, you know, Reggie, to his uncle. And I saw in the paper this morning that the uncle returned yesterday after a long voyage in his yacht. So, he must have come back too. He has to go everywhere his uncle goes. And everywhere the uncle went, the chappie was sure to go, murmured Reggie. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. I must see him. I haven't seen him since last summer, nearly a whole year, and he hasn't written to me, and I haven't dared to write to him for fear of letter going on wrong. So you see, I must go. Today's my only chance. Aunt Caroline has gone away. Father will be busy in the garden, and I won't notice whether I'm here or not. And besides, tomorrow will be too late, because Percy will be here. He was more furious about the thing than anyone. Rather the proud aristocrat, Percy, agreed Reggie. I understand absolutely. Tell me just what you want me to do. I want you to pick me up in the car about half a mile down the road. You can drop me somewhere in Piccadilly. That will be near enough to where I want to go. But the most important thing is about Percy. You must persuade him to stay and dine in town and come back here after dinner. Then I shall be able to get back by an afternoon train and no one will know I've been gone. That's simple enough, what? Consider it done. When do you want to start? At once. I'll toddle around to the garage and fetch the car. Reggie chuckled amusedly. Rum thing. The mater has just been telling me I ought to take you out for a drive. You are a darling, Reggie. Really. Reggie gave her back another paternal pat. I know what it means to be in love, dear old soul. I say, Maud, old thing, do you find love puts you off your stroke? What I mean is, does it make you slice your approach shots? Maud laughed. No, it hasn't had any effect on my game so far. I went round in 86 the other day. Reggie sighed enviously. Women are wonderful, he said. Well, I'll be lugging it and fetching the car. When you're ready, stroll along down the road and wait for me. When he had gone, Maud pulled a small newspaper clipping from her pocket. She had extracted it from yesterday's copy of the Morning Post Society column. It contained only a few words. Mr. Wilbur Raymond has returned to his residence at number 11A Belgrave Square from a prolonged voyage in his yacht, the Siren. Maud did not know Mr. Wilbur Raymond, and yet that paragraph had sent blood tingling through every vein in her body. For as she had indicated to Reggie, when the Wilbur Raymonds of this world return to their town residences, they bring with them their nephew and secretary, Geoffrey Raymond. Oh, and there's our leading man. And Geoffrey Raymond was the man Maud had loved ever since the day when she had met him in Wales. End of chapter 1. Let's do a little break in the chapters, between chapters, to review. If you're just arriving, we're reading A Damsel in Distress by P.G. Wodehouse. I'm quite enjoying it so far. I think it's so funny. I do generally enjoy, I feel like, this genre of book, you know, sort of looking at British aristocracy and like making fun of it a little bit. I thought the beginning was really funny. It began like, in this day of in this like modern age when everyone is such a hurry, and it's like 1919. And he was like, oh, no one has the attention span for like a really long novel that really goes into the details. You know, the novelist has to like get into the thick of it immediately, which is funny because it's exactly what people say about TikToks. You know, don't waste time in your TikTok with the introduction and everything. You gotta get straight into the thick of it. So really, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Very little has changed about the world in 1919. Well, a lot has changed about the world since 1919, but very little has changed about the human condition, which is another thing that I really enjoy on these like British aristocracy pieces, because there's always so much drama and gossip. And you know, that something that I do think is very British, which is that tendency of like leave a lot implied, you know what I mean? Really damn people with like a few words, you know? If you were paying attention at the beginning, we had a lot of that at the beginning. With the whole thing where, was it Carolyn Bing? I don't know, one wife, or like, she may hasten her husband's death, but we don't know. We don't know. Alright, chapter 2. The sun that had shone so brightly on Telford Castle at noon, when Maud and Reggie Byng set out on their journey, shone on the west end of London with equal pleasantness at 2 o'clock. In Little Gooch Street, all the children of all the small shopkeepers who support life in that backwater by selling each other vegetables and singing canaries, right? Were out and about playing curious games of their own invention. Cats washed themselves on doorsteps, preparatory to looking in for lunch at one of the numerous garbage cans which dotted the sidewalk. Waiters peered austerely from the windows of the 2 Italian restaurants which carry on the Lucretia Borgia tradition by means of 1 shilling and 6 table d'hôte, I don't know what that means, luncheons. The proprietor of the grocery store on the corner was bidding a silent farewell to a tomato which even he, though a doubtless optimist, had been compelled to recognize as having outlived its utility. On all these things the sun shone with a genial smile. Unrealistic. There's no sun in Britain. Everyone knows that. Round the corner in Shaftesbury Avenue, an east wind was doing its best to pierce the hardened hides of the citizenry, but it did not penetrate into Little Gooch Street, which, facing south and being narrow and sheltered, was enabled practically to bask. Sorry, 1 second. Mac, the stout guardian of the stage door of the Regal Theatre, whose gilded front entrance is on the avenue, emerged from the little glass case in which the management kept him, and came out to observe life and its phenomena with an indulgent eye. Mac was feeling happy this morning. His job was a permanent one, not influenced by the success or failure of the productions which followed one another at the theatre throughout the year. But he felt, nevertheless, a sort of proprietary interest in these ventures, and was pleased when they secured the approval of the public. Last night's opening, a musical piece by an American author and composer, had undoubtedly made a big hit, and Mac was glad, because he liked what he had seen of the company, and in the brief time in which he had known him, had come to entertain a warm regard for George Bevan, the composer, who had travelled over from New York to help with the London production. Wait, is it George Bevan or George Joffrey who's the main leading man? Now I think it's this one. Wait, I'm confused. Huh, interesting. George Bevan turned the corner now. Maybe they're faking us out with Joffrey, and we're actually gonna. George is gonna swoop in. George and Joffrey are two similar names. Can we agree on that? There shouldn't be two characters named George and Joffrey. That's too confusing. George Bevan turned the corner now, walking slowly, and it seemed to Mac gloomily towards the stage door. He was a young man of about 27, tall and well-knit, with an agreeable, clean-cut face, of which a pair of good and honest eyes were the most noticeable feature. I think this is so funny. Like, how, like, what, can you explain to me, like, the physiognomy? Like, the physical characteristics of a dishonest eye? How do you know he's honest by his eyes? His sensitive mouth was drawn down a little at the corners, and he looked tired. Morning, Mac. Good morning, sir. Anything for me? Yes, sir. Some telegrams. I'll get 'em. Oh, I'll get 'em, said Mac, as if reassuring some doubting friend and supporter as to his ability to carry through a labor of Hercules. He disappeared into his glass case. George Bevan remained outside in the street, surveying the frisking children with a somber glance. They seemed to him very noisy, very dirty, and very young. Disgustingly young. Theirs was joyous, exuberant youth, which made a fellow feel at least 60. Something was wrong with George today, for normally he was fond of children. Indeed, normally he was fond of most things. He was a good-natured and cheerful young man, who liked life, and the great majority of those who lived it contemporaneously with himself. He had no enemies and many friends. But today he had noticed from the moment he had got out of bed that something was amiss with the world. Either he was in the grip of some divine discontent due to the highly developed condition of his soul, or else he had a grouch. One of the two. Or it might have been the reaction from the emotions of the previous night. On the morning after an opening, your sensitive artist is always apt to feel as if he had been dried over a barrel. Besides, last night there had been a supper party after the performance at the flat, which the comedian of the troupe had rented in Jermyn Street, a forced, rowdy supper party where a number of tired people with overstrained nerves had seemed to feel it a duty to be artificially vivacious. If that doesn't describe like every theater kid cast party after like closing night or whatever. It had lasted till 4 o'clock when the morning papers with the notices arrived, and George had not got to bed till 4:30. These things colored the mental outlook. Mac reappeared. Here you are, sir. Thanks. George put the telegrams in his pocket. A cat, on its way back from lunch, paused beside him in order to use his leg as a serviette. George tickled it under the ear abstractedly. He was always courteous to cats, but today he went through the movements perfunctorily and without enthusiasm. The cat moved on. Mac became conversational. They tell me the piece was a hit last night, sir. It seemed to go very well. My missus saw it from the gallery, and all the first-nighters was speaking very highly of it. Okay, so highly is drawn with like a apostrophe in the H, so I assume this man has some sort of accent, but I will not torment you by trying to do the accent. So just remember in your mind that he has the accent, and I'm just going to speak normally. And all the first-nighters was speaking very highly of it. There's a regular clique, sir, over here in London, that goes to all the first nights in the gallery. Highly critical they are always, especially if it's an American piece like this one. If they don't like it, they precious soon let you know. My missus says they was all speaking very highly of it. My missus says she ain't seen a livelier show for a long time, and she's a great theater goer. My missus says they was all specially pleased with the music. That's good. The morning leader gave it a fine write-up. How's the rest of the papers? Splendid, all of them. I haven't seen the evening papers yet. I came out to get them. Hold on, I need to burp. Nice. Splendid, all of them. I haven't seen the evening papers yet. I came out to get them. Mac looked down the street. There will be a rehearsal this afternoon, I suppose, sir. Here's Miss Dory coming along. George followed his glance. A tall girl in a tailor-made suit of blue was coming towards them. Even at a distance, one caught the genial personality of the new arrival. It seemed to go before her like a heartening breeze. She picked her way carefully through the children crawling on the sidewalk. She stopped for a moment and said something to one of them. The child grinned. Even the proprietor of the grocery store appeared to brighten up at the sight of her, as at the sight of some old friend. How's business, Bill? She called to him as she passed the spot where he stood brooding on the mortality of tomatoes. And though he replied, "Rotten," a faint, green smile did nevertheless flicker across his tragic mask. Billy Dorr, who was one of the chorus of George Bevan's musical comedy, had an attractive face, a mouth that laughed redly, rather bright golden hair, which, she was fond of insisting with perfect truth, was genuine, though appearances were against it, and steady blue eyes. The latter were frequently employed by her in quelling admirers who were encouraged by the former to become too ardent. Billy's views on the opposite sex who forgot themselves were as rigid as those Lord Marshmoreton concerning thrips. She liked men, and she would signify disliking in a practical manner by lunching and dining with them, but she was entirely self-supporting, and when men overlooked that fact, she reminded them of it in no uncertain voice, for she was a girl of ready speech and direct. "Morning, George. Morning, Mac. Any mail?" "I'll see, miss." "How did your better 4/5 like the show, Mac?" "I was just telling Mr. Bevan, miss, that the missus says she hadn't seen a livelier show for a long time." "Fine. I knew I'd be a hit. Well, George, how's the boy this bright afternoon?" "Limp and pessimistic. That comes of sitting up till 4 in the morning with festive hams. You were up as late as I was, and you look like little Ava after a night of sweet childish slumber." "Yes, but I drank ginger ale, and didn't smoke 18 cigars." "And yet, I don't know. I think I must be getting old, George. All-night parties seem to have lost their charm. I was ready to quit at 1 o'clock, but it didn't seem 80. I think I'll marry a farmer and settle down." George was amazed. He had not expected to find his present view of life shared in this quarter. "I was just thinking myself," he said, feeling not for the first time how different Billy was from the majority of those with whom his profession brought him into contact. How flat it all was. The show business, I mean, and these darn first nights, and the party after the show which you can't sidestep. Something tells me I'm about through." Billy Dorr nodded. "Anybody with any sense is always about through with the show business. I know I am. If you think I'm wedded to my art, let me tell you I'm going to get a divorce the first chance that comes along. It's funny about the show business, the way one drifts into it and sticks, I mean. Take me, for example. Nature had it all doped out for me to be the belle of Hicks Corners. What I ought to have done was buy a gingham bonnet and milk cows, but I would come to the great city and help brighten up the tired businessman." "I didn't know you were fond of the country, Billy." "Me? I wrote the words and music. Didn't you know I was a country kid? My dad ran a bide a wee home for flowers, and I used to know them all by their middle names. He was a nursery gardener out in Indiana. I tell you, when I see a rose nowadays, I shake its hand and I say, 'Well, well, Cyril, how's everything with you? And how are Joe and Jack and Jimmy and all the rest of the boys at home?' Do you know how I used to put in my time the first few nights I was over here in London? I used to hang around Covent Garden with my hand back, sniffing. The boys that mess about with the flowers there used to stub their toes on me so often that they got to look on me as part of the scenery." "That's where you ought to have been last night. We'd have had a better time. Say, George, did you see that awful mistake on Nature's part that Babe Sinclair showed up with towards the middle of the proceedings? You must have noticed him, because he took up more room than any one man was entitled to. His name was Spencer Gray. George recalled having been introduced to a fat man of his own age who answered to that name. "It's a darn shame," said Billy indignantly. "Babe is only a kid. This is the first show she's been in, and I happen to know there's an awfully nice boy over in New York crazy to marry her, and I'm certain this gink is giving her a raw deal. He tried to get a hold of me about a week ago, but I turned him down hard, and I suppose he thinks Babe is easier. And it's no good talking to her. She thinks he's wonderful. That's another kick I have against the show business. It seems to make girls such darn chumps. Well, I wonder how much longer Mr. Arbuckle is going to be retrieving my mail. What ho, within there, fatty. Mac came out apologetic, carrying letters. Sorry, miss. By an oversight, I put you among the G's. All's well that ends well. Put me among the G's. There's a good title for a song for you, George. Excuse me while I grapple with the correspondence. I'll bet half of these are mash notes. I got 3 between the first and second acts last night. Why, the nobility and gentry of this burg should think that I'm their affinity just because I've got golden hair, which is perfectly genuine, Mac. I can show you the pedigree, and because I earn an honest living singing off the key is more than I can understand. Mac leaned his massive shoulders comfortably against the building and resumed his chat. I expect you're feeling very happy today, sir. George pondered. He was certainly feeling better since he had seen Billy Dore, but he was far from being himself. I ought to be, I suppose, but I'm not. Ah, you're getting blarzy, sir. That's what it is. You've had too much of the fat, you have. This piece was a big hit in America, wasn't it? Yes, it ran over a year in New York, and there are 3 companies of it out now. That's how it is, you see. You've gone and got blarzy. Too big a helping of success you've had. Mac wagged the head like Harvest Moon. You aren't a married man, are you, sir? Billy Dore finished skimming through her mail and crumpled the letters up into a large ball, which he handed to Mac. Here's something for you to read in your spare moments, Mac. Glance through them any time you have a suspicion you may be a chump, and you have the comfort of knowing that there are others. What were you saying about being married? Mr. Bevan and I were having a talk about him being blarzy, miss. Are you blarzy, George? So Mac says. And why is he blarzy, miss? Demanded Mac rhetorically. Don't ask me, it's not my fault, said Billy. It's because, as I was saying, he's had too big a helping of success, and because he ain't a married man. You did say you wasn't a married man, didn't you, sir? I didn't, but I'm not. That's how it is, you see. You pretty soon get sick of pulling off good things if you ain't got nobody to back you on the back for doing of it. Why, when I was single, if I got hold of a sure thing for the 3 o'clock race and picked up a couple of quid, the thrill of it didn't seem to linger somehow. But now, if some of the gentlemen that come here put me onto something safe and I make a bit, half the fascination of it is taking the stuff home and rolling it onto the kitchen table and having her pat me on the back. How about when you lose? I don't tell her, said Mac simply. You seem to understand the art of being happy, Mac. It ain't an art, sir. It's just getting hold of the right little woman and having a nice little home of your own to go back to at night. Mac, said Billy admiringly, you talk like a Tin Pan Alley song hit, except that you've left out the scent of honeysuckle and old Mr. Moon climbing up over the trees. Well, you're quite right. I'm all for the simple and domestic myself. If I could find the right man and he didn't see me coming and duck, I'd become one of the Mendelssohn's March daughters right away. Are you going, George? There's a rehearsal at 2:30 for cuts. I want to get the evening papers and send off a cable or 2. See you later. We shall meet at Philippi. Mac eyed George's retreating back till he had turned the corner. A nice, pleasant gentleman, Mr. Bevan, he said. Too bad he's got the pip the way he has, just after having a big success like this one here. Comes of being an artist, I suppose. Miss Dore dived into her vanity case and produced a puff with which she proceeded to powder her nose. All composers are nuts, Mac. I was in a show once where the manager was spanning the composer because there wasn't a number in the score that had a tune to it. The poor geek admitted they weren't very tuney, but said the thing about his music was that it had such a wonderful aroma. They all get that way. The jazz seems to go to their head. George is all right, though, and don't let anyone tell you different. Have you known him long, miss? About 5 years. I was a stenographer in the house that published his songs when I first met him. And there's another thing you've got to hand it to George for. He hasn't let success give him a swelled head. The money that boy makes is sinful, Mac. He wears $1,000 bills next to his skin winter and summer, but he's just the same as he was when I first knew him, when he was just hanging around Broadway, looking out for a chance to be allowed to slip a couple of interpolated numbers into any old show that came along. Yes, Put it in your diary, Mac, and write it on your cuff. George Bevan's alright. He's an ace. Unconscious of these eulogies, which, coming from one whose judgment he respected, might have cheered him up, George wandered down Shaftesbury Avenue, feeling more depressed than ever. The sun had gone in for the time being, and the see, now that's British. That's British weather right there. The sun had gone in for the time being, and the east wind was frolicking around him like a playful puppy, patting him with a cold paw, nuzzling his ankles, bounding away and bounding back again, and behaving generally as east winds do when they discover a victim who has come out without his spring overcoat. It was plain to George now that the sun and the wind were a couple of confidence tricksters working together as a team. The sun had disarmed him with specious promises and an air of cheery good fellowship, and had delivered him into the hands of the wind, which was now going through him with the swift thoroughness of the professional hold-up artist. He quickened his steps, and began to wonder if he was so sunk in senile decay as to have acquired the liver. He discarded the theory as repellent. And yet, there must be a reason for his depression. Today of all days, as Mac had pointed out, he had everything to make him happy. Popular as he was in America, this was the first piece of his to be produced in London, and there was no doubt that it was a success of unusual dimensions. And yet, he felt no elation. He reached Piccadilly and turned westwards, and then, as he passed the gates of the In-N-Out Club, he had a moment of clear vision and understood everything. He was depressed because he was bored, and he was bored because he was lonely. Mac, that solid thinker, had been right. The solution of the problem of life was to get a hold of the right girl and have a home to go back to at night. He was mildly surprised that he had tried in any other direction for an explanation of his gloom. It was all the more inexplicable in that fully 80% of the lyrics which he had set in the course of his musical comedy career had that thought at the back of them. George gave himself up to an orgy of sentimentality. He seemed to be alone in the world which had paired itself off into a sort of seething welter of happy couples. Taxicabs full of happy couples rolled by every minute. Passing omnibuses squeaked beneath the weight of happy couples. The very policeman across the street had just grinned at a flitting shopgirl, and she had smiled back at him. The only female in London who did not appear to be attached was a girl in brown who was coming along the sidewalk at a leisurely pace, looking about her in a manner that suggested that she found Piccadilly a new and stimulating spectacle. As far as George could see, she was an extremely pretty girl, small and dainty, with a proud little tilt to her head, and the jaunty walk that spoke of perfect health. She was, in fact, precisely the sort of girl that George felt he could love with all the stored-up devotion of an old buffer of 27 who had squandered none of his rich nature in foolish flirtations. He had just begun to weave a rose-tinted romance about their two selves when a cold reaction set in. Even as he paused to watch the girl threading her way through the crowd, the east wind jabbed an icy finger down the back of his neck, and the chill of it sobered him. After all, he reflected bitterly, this girl was only alone because she was on her way somewhere to meet some confounded man. Besides, there was no earthly chance of getting to know her. You can't rush up to pretty girls in the street and tell them you're lonely. Good advice right there. Some of you could stand to write that down. At least, you can, but it doesn't get you anywhere except the police station. George's gloom deepened, a thing he would not have believed possible a moment before. He felt that he had been born too late. The restraints of modern civilization irked him. It was not, he told himself, like this in the good old days. In the Middle Ages, for example, this girl would have been a damsel, and in that happy time, practically everybody whose technical rating was that of a damsel was in distress, and only too willing to waive the formalities in return for services rendered by the casual passerby. But the 20th century is a prosaic age, when girls are merely girls and have no troubles at all. Were he to stop this girl in brown and assure her that his aid and comfort were at her disposal, she would undoubtedly call that large policeman from across the way, and the romance would begin and end within the space of 30 seconds, or, if the policeman were a quick mover, rather less. Better to dismiss dreams and return to the practical side of life by buying the evening papers from the shabby individual beside him, who had just thrust an early edition in his face. After all, notices are notices, even when the heart is aching. George felt in his pocket for the necessary money, found emptiness, and remembered that he had left all his ready funds at his hotel. It was just one of the things he might have expected on a day like this. The man with the papers had the air of one whose business is conducted on purely cash principles. There was only one thing to be done: return to the hotel, retrieve his money, and try to forget the weight of the world and its cares in lunch. And from the hotel he could dispatch the 2 or 3 cables which he wanted to send to New York. The girl in brown was quite close now, and George was unable to get a clearer glimpse of her. She had more than fulfilled the promise she had given at a distance. Had she been constructed to his own specifications, she would not have been more acceptable in George's sight. And now she was going out of his life forever, with an overwhelming sense of pathos, for there is no pathos more bitter than that of parting from someone we have never met. George hailed a taxicab, which crawled at the side of the road, and, with all the refrains of all the sentimental song hits he had ever composed ringing in his ears, he got in and passed away. A rotten world, he mused, as the cab, after proceeding a couple of yards, came to a standstill in a block of the traffic. A dull, flat bore of a world, in which nothing happens, or ever will happen. Even when you take a cab, it just sticks and doesn't move. At this point, the door of the cab opened, and the girl in brown jumped in. "I'm so sorry," she said breathlessly, "but would you mind hiding me, please?" End of chapter 2. Thoughts so far? Pretty good. If you just got here, we're reading A Damsel in Distress by P.G. Wodehouse. We just finished chapter 2. Going pretty well. I like George so far. It does seem that he will be our main protagonist, not Joffrey, as I had previously thought. I quite like people who are dramatic, and just like the whole getting into the cab and being like, nothing has ever happened in this world because a pretty girl passed by me and I couldn't say anything to her. And again, I do think something that I find really interesting about reading old literature, or really old art of any kind, is you really do realize, like, hey, the more things change, the more they stay the same, baby. He's lonely, the loneliness epidemic. Hey, if you're a man struggling with the loneliness epidemic, read Damsel in Distress by P.G. Wodehouse, and then maybe you'll be a little less lonely and a little less sad. Okay, I think this will be the final chapter we'll read today. I am sort of losing steam. Maybe next time we can do it for a little bit longer, maybe not. I'll probably do it around this same time next week, if you want to come back, or you could always subscribe and get notified. Ring the bell and all that such stuff if you're liking this book, or I suppose liking my narration of it. Make sure to like this video. And yeah. 3rd chapter. George hit her. He did it too, without wasting precious time by asking questions. In a situation which might have well thrown the quickest witted of man off his balance, he acted with promptitude, in intelligence and dispatch. The fact is, George had for years been an assiduous golfer. I will say, why do so many people in this book golf? Was golf like the hot new sport in 1919 for some reason? That's crazy. And there's no finer school for teaching concentration and a strict attention to the matter in hand. Few crises, however unexpected, have the power to disturb a man who has so conquered the weakness of the flash as to have trained himself to bend his left knee, raise his left heel, swing his arms well out from the body, twist himself into the shape of a corkscrew, and use the muscle of the wrist at the same time keeping his head still and his eye on the ball. Everyone says that. You can't surprise a man who golfs. Everyone says that. It is estimated that there are 23 important points to be borne in mind simultaneously while making a drive at golf. Oh my god, I'm sorry. How much about golf are we going to have to read? And to the man who has mastered the art of remembering them all, the task of hiding girls in taxicabs is mere child's play. To pull down the blinds on the side of the vehicle nearest the curb was with George the work of a moment. Then he leaned out of the center window in such a manner as completely to screen the interior of the cab from public view. "Thank you so much," murmured a voice behind him. It seemed to come from the floor. Not at all, said George, trying a sort of vocal chip shot out of the corner of his mouth, designed to lift his voice backward and lay dead inside the cab. He gazed upon Piccadilly with eyes from which the scales had fallen. Reason told him that he was still in Piccadilly. Otherwise, it would have seemed incredible to him that this could be the same street which a moment before he had passed judgment upon and found flat and uninteresting. True, in its salient features it had altered little. The same number of stodgy-looking people moved up and down. The buildings retained their air of not having had a bath since the days of the Tudors. The east wind still blew, but though superficially the same, in reality Piccadilly had altered completely. Before, it had just been Piccadilly. Now it was a golden street in the city of romance, a main thoroughfare of Baghdad, one of the principal arteries of the capital of fairyland. A rose-colored mist swam before George's eyes. His spirits, so low but a few moments back, soared like a good niblick shot out of the bunker of gloom. We get it. Stop it with the golf. The years fell away from him till, in an instant, from being a rather poorly preserved, liverish grey beard of 65 or so, he became a sprightly lad of 21, in a world of springtime and flowers and laughing brooks. In other words, taking it by and large, George felt pretty good. The impossible had happened. Heaven had sent him an adventure, and he didn't care if it snowed. It was possibly the rose-colored mist before his eyes that prevented him from observing the hurried approach of a faultlessly attired young man, aged about 21, who, during George's preparations for ensuring privacy in his cab, had been galloping in pursuit in a resolute manner that suggested a well-dressed bloodhound, somewhat overfed and out of condition. Only when this person stopped and began to pant within a few inches of his face did he become aware of his existence. "You, sir," said the bloodhound, removed a gleamy silk hat, mopping a pink forehead and replacing the luminous superstructure once more in position. "You, sir." Whatever may be said of the possibility of love at first sight, in which theory George was now a confirmed believer, there can be no doubt that an exactly opposite phenomenon is of frequent occurrence. After one look at some people, even friendship is impossible. Such a one, in George's opinion, was this gurgling excrescence underneath the silk hat. He comprised in his single person practically all of the qualities which George disliked most. He was, for a young man, extraordinarily obese. All right, man. Already a second edition of his Chin had been published, and the perfectly cut morning coat which encased his upper section bulged out in an opulent semicircle. He wore a little mustache, which to George's prejudiced eye seemed more a complaint than a mustache. His face was red, his manner dictatorial, and he was touched in the wind. Take him for all in all, he looked like a bit of bad news. George had been educated at Lawrenceville and Harvard, Harvard man, and had subsequently had the privilege of mixing socially with many of New York's most prominent theatrical managers, so he knew how to behave himself. In 1919 Harvard had a theater program? That seems so surprising to me. No Vere de Vere could have exhibited greater repose of manner. "And what," he inquired suavely, leaning a little further out of the cab, "is eating you, Bill?" A messenger boy, two shabby men engaged in the non-essential industries, and a shop-girl paused to observe the scene. Time was not of the essence to these confirmed sightseers. The shop-girl was late already, so it didn't matter if she was any later. If you're already late, you might as well stop to watch the drama unfolding, you know what I mean? The messenger boy had nothing on hand except a message marked, "Important, rush." And as for the two shabby men, their only immediate plans consisted of a vague intention of getting to some public house and leaning against a wall. So George's time was their time. One of the pair put his head on one side and said, "What ho!" The other picked up a cigar stub from the gutter and began to smoke. Yuck. "A young lady just got into your cab," said the stout young man. "Surely not," said George. "What the devil do you mean, surely not? I've been in this cab all the time, and I should have noticed." At this juncture the block in the traffic was relieved, and the cab bowled smartly on for some 50 yards when it was again halted. George, protruding from the window like a snail, was entertained by the spectacle of the pursuit. The hunt was up. Short of throwing his head up and baying, the stout young man behaved exactly as a bloodhound in similar circumstances would have conducted itself. He broke into a jerky gallop, attended by his self-appointed associates, and considering that the young man was so stout that the messenger boy considered it unprofessional to hurry, that the shop girl had doubts as to whether sprinting was quite ladylike, and that the two bohemians were moving at a quicker gait than the shuffle for the first occasion in 11 years, the cavalcade made good time. The cavalcade made good time. The cab was still stationary when they arrived in a body. "Here he is, governor," said the messenger boy, removing a bead of perspiration with the rush message. "Here he is, governor," said the other, non-smoking bohemian. What do you think of my British way of saying governor, huh? It's spelled that way, so I really have to say governor. "What-oh, here I am," agreed George affably, "and what can I do for you?" The smoker spat appreciatively at a passing dog. The point seemed to him well taken. Not for many a day had he so enjoyed himself. In an arid world containing too few goes of gin and too many policemen, a world in which the poor were oppressed and could seldom even enjoy a quiet cigar without having their fingers trodden upon, he found himself for the moment contented, happy, and expectant. This looked like a row between toffs, and of all the things which most intrigued him, a row between toffs ranked highest. "Arr," he said approvingly, "now you're talking." The shopgirl had espied an acquaintance in the crowd. She gave tongue. "Mordi, come here quick, something happening." Again, these are spelled in a way where it's supposed to be kind of like a lower class British accent, so just imagine that in your head. Modi, accompanied by perhaps a dozen more of London's millions, added herself to the audience. These all belong to the class which will gather round and watch silently while a moderate men's attire. They are not impatient, they do not call for a rapid and continuous action. A mere hole in the ground, which of all sights is perhaps the least vivid and dramatic, is enough to grip their attention for hours at a time. They stare at George and George's cab with unblinking gaze. They did not know what would happen or when it would happen, but they intended to wait till something did happen. It might be for years or it might be forever, but they meant to be there when things began to occur. Speculations became audible. "What is it? An accident?" "Nah, Gent had his pocket picked. 2 toffs had a scrap. Feller bilked the cabman." A skeptic made a cynical suggestion. "They're doing it of it for the pictures." The idea gained instant popularity. "D'ye hear that? It's a film. What-oh, Charlie? The camera is in the cab. What will they be up to next?" A red-nosed spectator with a tray of color studs harnessed to his stomach started another school of thought. He spoke with decision as one having authority. "Nothing of the blinking kind. The fat one's been having 1 or 2 around the corner, and it's gone and got into his head." The driver of the cab, who till now had been ostentatiously unaware that there was any sort of disturbance among the lower orders, suddenly became humanly inquisitive. "What's it all about?" he asked, swinging around and addressing George's head. "Exactly what I want to know," said George. He indicated the collar-stud merchant. "The gentleman over there with the portable Woolworth bargain counter seems to me to have the best theory." The stout young man, whose peculiar behavior had drawn all this flattering attention from the many-headed, and who appeared considerably ruffled by the publicity, had been puffing noisily during the foregoing conversation. Now, having recovered sufficient breath to resume the attack, he addressed himself to George once more. "Damn you, sir, will you let me look inside that cab?" "Leave me," said George. "I would be alone. There is a young lady in that cab. I saw her get in, and I have been watching ever since, and she has not got out, so she is there now." George nodded approval of this close reasoning. "Your argument seems to be without a flaw. But what then? We applaud the man of logic, but what of the man of action? What are you going to do about it?" Ooh, what a line. "Get out of my way." "I won't." Then I'll force my way in." "If you try it, I shall infallibly bust you on the jaw." The stout young man drew back a pace. "You can't do that sort of thing, you know." I know I can, said George, but I shall. In this life, my dear sir, we must be prepared for every emergency. We must distinguish between the unusual and the impossible. It will be unusual for a comparative stranger to lean out of a cab window and sock you on, but you appear to have laid your plans on the assumptions that it would be impossible. Let this be a lesson to you. I tell you what it is. The advice I give to every young man starting life is, never confuse the unusual with the impossible. Take the present case, for instance. If you had only realized the possibility of someone someday busting you on the jaw when you tried to get into a cab, you might have thought out dozens of crafty schemes for dealing with the matter. As it is, you're unprepared. The thing comes on you as a surprise. The whisper flies around the clubs. Poor old what's-his-name has been taken unawares. He cannot cope with the situation. The man with the collar studs made another diagnosis. He was seeing clearer and clearer into the thing every minute. Loony, he decided. This here one's been mopping of it up, and the one in the cab... Orf? What's Orf? The one in the cab's Orf is blooming. I don't know what that means. And the one in the cab's Orf is blooming onion. That's why he's standing up instead of seating. He won't sit down except to bring him a bit of toast because he thinks he's a poached egg. George beamed upon the intelligent fellow. Your reasoning is admirable, but he broke off here, not because he had not more to say, but for the reason that the stout young man, now in quite a berserk frame of mind, made a sudden spring at the cab door and clutched the handle, which he was about to wrench, when George acted with all the promptitude and decision which had marked his behavior from the start. It was a situation which called for the nicest judgment. To allow the assailant free play with the handle, or even to wrestle with him for its possession, entailed the risk that the door might open and reveal the girl. To bust the young man one on the jaw, as promised, on the other hand, was not, in George's eyes, a practical policy. Excellent a deterrent as the threat of such a proceeding might be, its actual accomplishment was not to be thought of. Jails yawn, and actions for assault lie in wait for those who go about the place busting their fellows on the jaw. No, something swift, something decided and immediate was indicated, but something that stopped short of technical battery. George brought his hand round with a sweep and knocked the stout young man's silk hat off. The effect was magical. We, all of us, have our Achilles heel, and paradoxically enough, in this case of the stout young man, that heel was his hat. Superbly built, but the only hatter in London who can construct a silk hat that is a silk hat, and freshly ironed by loving hands, but a brief hour before at the only shaving parlor in London where ironing is ironing and not a brutal attack. It was his pride and joy. To lose it was like losing his trousers. It made him feel insufficiently clad. With a passionate cry like that of some wild creature deprived of its young, the erstwhile berserk released the handle and sprang in pursuit. At the same moment, the traffic moved on again. The last George saw was a group scene with the stout young man in the middle of it. The hat had been popped up into the infield where it had been caught by the messenger boy. The stout young man was bending over toward it and stroking it with soothing fingers. It was too far off for anything to be audible, but he seemed to George to be murmuring words of endearment to it. Then, placing it on his head, he darted out into the world, and George saw him no more. The audience remained motionless, staring at the spot where the incidents had happened. They would continue to do this till the next policeman came along and moved them on. With a pleasant wave of farewell, in case any of them might be glancing in his directions, George drew in his body and sat down. The girl in brown had risen from the floor if she had ever been there, and was now seated composedly at the further end of the cab. Next chapter, please. Next page, please. Why is the next page not loading? Hey, excuse me? Do you see what I'm doing? Is this like a sample and I have to... Okay, hold on. Let me sign up for an account on this website real quick. So far, so good. Quite an entertaining book. I'm enjoying myself. It does, have some stuff about it, which, like, it was written in 1919, what can you do? But. Okay, here we go. I did have to make a count. Okay, so that's chapter 4 beginning. I am curious to see what her explanation is going to be, but I am also losing steam, and we got to save something for next time. I do believe both in consuming art and just like having fun in general and like going to parties, you have to stop at a moment when you're like, it's fun and you kind of like want more of it. Because otherwise it just like gets boring. So it's like a party. You have to leave the party while you're still having fun. Otherwise it just ruins the entire life, the entire party. My phone also just turned itself off. It's been doing this really fun thing where it will randomly restart, but I suppose that this time it was really well timed, so I can't complain. Anyway, next Thursday we'll be here. We'll be starting on chapter 4, and I hope you'll join me. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. See you next time.